So, welcome to today's session. Really delighted to be back on our Lunch and Learns. I'm Sally, I'm from Henpicked. I'm accompanied by our CEO, Deborah Garlick, who's going to be supporting today's session and joining us later on around questions that we may have. So, really want to get you engaged and involved as we go through the session. But really delighted to be joined today by Talycia Nayee, who's joining us to talk around breaking the silence on periods. So, Talycia, welcome to today's session. And I'll just ask you just to do a quick introduction of who you are and why you work on this content.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name's Talycia, pronouns are she, her, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with all of you today about breaking the silence on periods. I used to manage the Bloody Good Employers program. So, Bloody Good Period had a non-profit that sought to support people with advocating for themselves around menstrual health and menstrual justice. And I worked alongside my colleague Alicia, and we developed the Bloody Good Employers program. So I'm a bit of a menstrual health whiz, bit of a period whiz, and I absolutely love having conversations that feel a bit societally sticky. So I'm really looking forward to having a chat today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And it's a really great work. And what we're seeing is so much more conversation around this, both from a society point of view and in organizations. And so I think it's a really great conversation for us to be having. So I just think, first of all, it'd be good for us to chat around why you think stigma really still exists and where you tend to see it shows up from the experience that you've had.
Yeah, so I think it's all to do with upbringing, isn't it? And how we're brought up and how we're taught about these conversations. And I know in the UK school system, it's taught the exact same way that it was when I was at school. And I'm sure when everyone else was at school in the room as well, it's taught the same way, where in year six, you are split off between boys and girls in two different classrooms, and boys learn about penile health and put condoms on bananas, and girls learn about periods, the menstrual cycle. And the thing that always sticks out to me is that dissonance in the playground afterwards, and how everyone feels differently and no one knows how each other feels. The boys are running around and screaming in excitement and pride of their manhood, and women are and girls are crying in the playground, thinking a little bit more like, oh my goodness, what am I going to have to do and what am I going to have to manage for the next few years? And menopause is not talked about at that stage, because I think also there'd probably be a little bit of overkill on top of everything else. And it did feel like doom and gloom for me. So I think that's the root of that stigma for me, and then where that kind of was bred. But also in conversations in the household, we use names, code names, don't we? We use time of the month. We say that some people say that they're on the moon. Some people say that some aunties come to visit them. And this euphemistic language that we use just encourages us to continue to keep silent. And it's really unfortunate. And I'm really working hard in the background to try and change that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen even that societal shift just in terms of the way we talk around products and the way products are advertised. We talk about that a lot in our sessions of, actually it's talked about period products or period pads or period pants or whatever it might be that people choose to use. And there's much bigger range now, but removing away from, again, certainly what I was brought up with, it was sanitary products, it was feminine hygiene products, and that feeling that association of periods and being unhygienic or unclean. I think we've seen that really shift as well, haven't we?
Yeah, massively. I think two things pop up for me there is I remember when signs changed in supermarkets from feminine hygiene products to sanitary products, and then again to period products. And it was really monumental, because I was like, oh, that's what they should be called. They're nothing to do with being clean or being dirty or anything like
Yeah.
that. And secondly, thinking a little bit more about um when we're having these conversations with people on a day-to-day basis, and the language has changed on a day-to-day basis because of campaigning work. So it's happening in professional environments as well as in those personal environments as well, because we're seeing that shift societally, which is really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just adverts for period products now, rather than it being a blue kind of clinical liquid poured onto a pad, it's a red liquid representing someone bleeding, and that recognition that this is actually what happens and it's okay because it's a very normal process. And I think that's a real shift for us we've seen. And what would you say you've seen in terms of that kind of stigma or the barriers that get in the way of talking about this at work?
I mean, everyone has shoved a tampon or a pad in their sleeve at one point or another and done that awkward shift to the office toilets, haven't they? So I think it's that conversation around like hiding things and not being able to have that conversation with your manager. And what we're talking about at the moment is that day-to-day issue for the average menstruator. But if you are someone that has a menstrual health condition, or you are someone that suffers with endometriosis, the layers of stigma and taboo that you have to kind of grapple with and also kind of steamroll through is really massive. And I have heard, particularly for people with menstrual health conditions, but also for people that are perimenopausal, go through this situation of leaving their old job and coming out as menopausal or coming out as someone with a condition. So it has been and continues to be a really big difficulty and barrier for a lot of people. Um, and it is something that we have to keep talking about, because it is opening up. The conversations around menstrual health are definitely opening up, and it's because of work like Bloody Good Period. It's because of work like Henpicked. It's, there are really good period product organizations as well that are working towards really breaking down the barriers. I think the body form advert, I think it was last year or the year before, that was a really big conversation changer, that really helped that narrative as well. But in the workplace, it's quite difficult, and there are a lot of banter and jokes and microaggressions that still exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'd see with organizations that are really embracing and addressing this, it's that normalizing of conversations in the workplace to say that it's okay. And I think the big thing we do when we're educating around menstruation and menstrual health is that kind of actually understanding our bodies in a lot better. As you say, what we get taught about in school kind of stays with us, but actually no one really talks around, well, what's a normal period like? And actually, if you are experiencing really severe pain or you're having really heavy bleeding, that isn't something that you should just have to put up with. But I think there are things that get in the way of us actually addressing or seeking help when things maybe aren't quite right. Any thoughts around that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I go on about this all the time, but work has replaced school for us. As we've grown up, we go to school, then we go to uni, or we study further, or we go into a role, and we work from that point onwards. And that is the centralized space in which we get information. And therefore, workplaces need to be doing more to advocate for their employees' health. And this isn't just a situation where we think you should do it because it's good and we think it's a good thing to do. Actually, it encourages your employees to stay, and it does like really garner retention rates. And I've seen that in organizations. So if you put together and work with consultants, or you work with your teams, or you work with your ERGs and put together something like a talking to your doctor guide or talking to your manager guide, and thinking a little bit more about how you're actually able to foster healthy and conducive conversations around your health, it makes your workplace a better place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And we find a lot of people are really struggling with symptoms of whether it's their general menstrual cycle or menstrual health condition. Because they don't have that information or those tools, people, excuse me, people will continue to kind of struggle and trying to kind of mask what they're experiencing. We see lots of presenteeism or increase in absenteeism. But actually, when people find that education and understanding around actually this isn't right, what's going on with my body, I need help and support around this, and they're able to then advocate themselves with healthcare professionals, get the support and help they need in managing symptoms, it can make a huge difference to how they're able to show up at work and the impact it can have at work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that when you're able to speak clearly and freely, and you have things like a symptom list, and you know exactly how you might need help,
Yeah.
communicating that to your teams and your managers is, yes, it's
Yeah.
invaluable.
Absolutely. And then just starting to think around what has an impact on this. So, what factors do you think impact how people experience menstruation and menstrual health conditions? So, in terms of both the symptoms and what they're experiencing or what condition they're living with, but also in terms of everything else that might be going on in life.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's thinking about all of the factors that make you who you are, make you a woman, make you a person that menstruates, and realizing that this is one part of it, and it can take over your life, and it does take over your life for so many people. Um, but life's such a balancing act, and it's so much juggling at the moment. Particularly, we've got people have kids, people have appointments to get to, they've got responsibilities, they've got deadlines, and people don't have the time. We're so time poor at the moment in society that we're not actually able to do that work. And I think where workplaces come in to be able to support people is making the space for people. And that's where those things like employee resource groups, talks like this are really, really helpful. So it's incredibly difficult to figure out what factors actually do affect you, but it's so individualistic. I know for me personally, something that really affects me is my mental health around my period. And I don't work for the 5 days, well, at least 3 out of the 5 days that I am menstruating, but I work for myself. So I'm able to kind of like pencil out that time for myself. But other people don't have that. They could have a massive meeting that day, or they could have an interview that day, for example, and you have to push through. And we're so used to pushing through as a society that we need to stop, and we actually need to think about our cycles and how we might actually be able to target our lifestyles to our cycle and how we work best.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely seeing that again in some of the organizations we work with, that recognition that you will feel in general, and not it's not for everyone, you will may feel very different at different times of your menstrual cycle. We start to see it in the world of sports where athletes are actually managing their training around their menstrual cycle, and how important that is to actually lean into what's going on in the body, because there are different times of our menstrual cycle where we feel very different. A lot of people, once they've had their period in that first half of the menstrual cycle, can feel full of energy and really able to take on new things. But in the few days before they menstruate or while they're menstruating, things can feel really challenging. And then you add the layer of complexity of some of the menstrual health conditions, like endometriosis or PMDD or adenomyosis. It adds in then another level of complexity. And I think understanding those lived experiences, I think, is really important when it comes to those menstrual health conditions. I know one of the people yeah, the audience may have seen on one of our lunch and learns before is a lady called Vicky Williams, who shared her story around endometriosis and some of the treatments and decisions she was having to make outside of work, and then stepping back into work and trying to perform as normal and be as normal, even though she was making decisions around treatment that could potentially affect her fertility or was in really severe pain. And I don't think we necessarily recognise that complexity, I think, around those menstrual health conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are campaigning for endometriosis to change names because and change the definition, because people are thinking that now the way it's kind of diagnosed and the treatment plan looks like is that it's a menstrual health condition. And although it's endometrial like tissue that grows there, it's a full body condition. It affects you. You can have endometrial tissue growing in your brain, and there are different stages, and it works very similarly to a cancer. So we really need to be thinking about the practicalities of how these conditions affect our body and what they actually look like in practice. And the only way we're going to do that is hearing from people that navigate it every day.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what was great to see the BAFTA short film award for This is Endometriosis. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's a really it's quite a tough watch because it's really challenging in terms of understanding the experience, but such a brave and inspiring watch to be able to share that story. And I think that's really important. But I also think the other thing of complexity is recognizing that all different other parts of our identities can also affect the way we may experience menstruation, menstrual health, whether that's our living with something like a disability, gender, our ethnicity, our culture, our general health. I think there are lots of other things. Any thoughts around that kind of intersectionality of menstruation and menstrual health and other parts of our identity?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly for people of color and people from minoritized communities, you deal with a lot of additional mental health difficulties because of the fact you're navigating the world as a minority, and that is something that adds to the stress of your everyday life in a way that you cannot control. So that's obviously going to have a massive impact on your menstrual health. And on top of that, if you come from a religious environment or you come from an environment that's incredibly traditional or orthodox in values, that adds another level of it, because the conversations you feel like you need to have or the questions you feel like you need to ask, you actually can't, and you don't feel safe to,
Yeah.
and it blocks you in, and that adds a further level of stress. So it can be incredibly difficult, and I think that's why I continue to bang on about the workplace being this neutral, centralized place, because people can feel quite safe speaking to another colleague or another manager at work about what's going on with them, and it can be the first place or the first step for people to get what they need. I know that was the case for me when I started working in the menstrual health space. I definitely felt more comfortable saying the word period. I remember in my first weeks, I worked with a man that sat next to me, and I used to whisper it, and he was the co-founder of the program that I worked on, and I just didn't feel safe to say the word period in front of him. And I slowly realized, I was like, oh, I actually am able to have these conversations, and it helped me and it trained me to be able to talk to men about periods in a way that I wouldn't have been able to, given my socioeconomic and cultural background.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, I think the workplace is often an opportunity for people to gain that education that they may not be, we've talked about that lack of education. And we've had so many people saying, I've learned more about my body in the last hour than I've learned in my whole life because and the opportunity organizations have to be able to provide that and thinking about how people access that support. And I think the other thing around is the kind of access to healthcare and sometimes healthcare inequalities, again, sometimes based on our identity, but in general as well it can feel a bit of a postcode lottery sometimes in terms of how someone is supported. Any kind of tips or hints around how someone might be able to really advocate themselves in that kind of healthcare setting?
Well, you have between 7 and 10 minutes for a GP appointment if you call up at 8 o'clock to get a same day appointment. Um, in most areas, I'm pretty sure that's the case, or you might be able to have access through your NHS app. And 10 minutes is not nearly enough to go in and kind of ramble on about the experiences you have. I think the best thing you can do is keep a symptom diary, keep a diary, have a look at things like NICE guidelines, have a look at the NHS website, and have a look and see what do the things you experience match up to. Please don't go onto WebMD or anything like that. You might end up accidentally diagnosing yourself with something that you don't have. But having a look at reputable sources, keeping a symptom diary, and really going in and advocating for the fact that you want to speak with a menstrual health professional is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we come on to questions, I just want to think, are there any other practical tips that you can say to people in terms of helping remove these barriers, practical tips to opening up this conversation?
I think saying the word period is a really radical one. Saying that you're on your period, saying that you're about to come on your period. I was in a room yesterday that was really empowering and incredible, where I asked all of the people in the room, I was like, have you seen on TikTok that lots of people have been talking about being luteal? And everyone put their hand up. And I said, does anyone know what that means? Everyone put their hand down. It's where using these words are creating and generating popularity in popular culture on social media, but no one's really knowing exactly what it means. But if we're spreading the knowledge, people are more inclined to look it up and understand more about their body. So I really think saying the words, using the phases, and describing them really clearly is so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Deborah, just see what's going on in chat and some of the
I
questions.
know. Thank you both so much, everyone, for all of your comments in chat. And welcome to the team, Talycia. I've got to say, a great conversation there. But does anybody ever stop and think, how did we get here? How can we have workplaces, more women in the workplace than ever before, and we've never really considered hormones? We've done so much on menopause, and now it's time for menstruation. So it's great seeing so many comments coming up. I'm particularly intrigued by the one that says, somebody saying the younger generations know more than those of us who, as you described, Talycia, had our education at school. I can't remember the banana, I was in the wrong class. But certainly, I think my session was much more about not getting pregnant while at school rather than when is your superpower during the month and when might you not be feeling up to your normal self. And this is where, for me, this always comes back to that awareness. And how do you grow that awareness in workplaces and society? And Sally, I love what you were saying about every training session that we run, and we do so many. We get people saying, I've learnt more about my body in the last hour than I have the last number of decades, however old somebody might be. So that is absolutely key. I really feel for managers here because we haven't really covered them an awful lot, Sally. And I know you do a lot of the training for managers, and they just don't have the language to describe this. I did invite people to say, what do you call your periods? And somebody was saying that their mum always used to say the other. But they just don't have the language. So I love that tip around just say periods. It's not an icky word, is it?
No, and I think if you think back to the work we've done on menopause, that was one of the challenges we used to say to people is actually use the word menopause in a conversation. If you've never spoken about it before, get comfortable with the words and the actual words, not the euphemisms. And I think, Talycia, what you were saying there around some of the euphemisms we've seen before, and certainly historically, they're often very gendered, and they can often reinforce those feelings of stigma. I think we see that, don't we?
Yeah, massively. I'm just thinking back to a presentation where someone told me that the French call it the British are coming, and that floored me because it's got such like horrible connotations, but it's such a normalized thing for people to use such euphemistic language. And I think what we've got to remember here is, the work on menopause that's happening at the moment is great, and it's because of the years of campaigning that people have done and organizations have done. And what we need to be doing is building on that and talking about the whole of the cycle. And from menarche to menopause, we need to be talking about the whole journey and the whole life cycle of what someone goes through.
And this education is empowering, isn't it? I like
Absolutely.
the thought of the luteal. Actually, I never heard of the word until Sally mentioned it to me.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we have that understanding of the different phases of the menstrual cycle, and we know the words for them. And especially when it comes to diagnosing things like PMDD, we know the diagnosis of PMDD is about the symptoms people are experiencing that luteal phase, that second half of someone's menstrual cycle, is part of the diagnosis process. So we don't have the words or the language or the knowledge. It can actually make that even harder then to understand what's going on with our own bodies, or with the people that we care about, what we can do to support. I've got two daughters. We talk really openly about periods, and I ask them how their periods are. I asked them, my youngest one, when her periods first started, they were really quite challenging for her. And we've kept a really close eye on tracking symptoms, and they've definitely calmed down as she's moving through puberty. But that recognition early to say, actually, no, this isn't okay. It's not okay to have to change your period products more than every hour. It's often a sign there is something going on, and we should be getting help and support around that. But so many people we speak to say, well, I just thought I just had to get on with it, or I've been told, well, that's just what periods are like. Everyone's got to deal with it, and we want to remove that feeling because, yeah, that empowerment for people to say, actually, this is affecting my quality of life. And I want to find out what I can do to help manage either around my own cycle or manage symptoms that are causing particular challenges.
Sally, can I take you back to that point about what's normal? Because I know we talk a lot about, and we've mentioned endometriosis, there's PMDD, there's adenomyosis, PCOS, all sorts of different menstrual health conditions, but so many of us don't know what's normal.
Yeah, I don't know, Talycia, if you want to say how would you describe a normal period? And I don't like the word normal, but I think it helps us to define for people when they should be getting help and support.
Yeah, absolutely. I think normal is a really difficult thing to decide, to discern. And what I've always used when speaking to people is discerning between discomfort versus pain. So your uterine lining on your during your menstrual phase is shedding, and you have to use a lot of muscle, and there is a lot of muscle contraction to push that out. That's a discomforting experience. That is naturally going to be like, I'm a bit tired today. Okay, I'm feeling a bit sluggish. Okay, great. Like, I know that. But pain is a very different feeling to discomfort. And if you're experiencing anything in the realms of pain, have a conversation. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. And I think it's as well where we always say that if in terms, people say, well, when should I go and ask for help or support about this? I think if your periods or your menstrual cycle are worrying you, I
Mm.
think if you feel, as you say, that there is pain or there is heavy bleeding, where, say, you're bleeding, where you're having to change period products every hour or more than every hour for longer than, they say the average period is kind of 4 to 8 days. If you're bleeding for a lot more of your menstrual cycle, these are often signs that something's going on. Or if something changes for you, I think that's again, if something you'll have, say when we say normal, you'll have your own normal, own regular cycle, and if something seems different for you, that is then causing you worry or causing you impact on quality of life. And we often say when we're talking to people about when they go and see a healthcare practitioner, it's great to list your symptoms, but it's also really important to let them know the impact this is having on participation in daily activities, whether that's work, social activities, what you're having to miss out on, what medication you're having to take to get through, how you're kind of, as talked about that pushing through. I think that's a really common thing. Make that really clear when you're talking to a healthcare practitioner so they can really understand the impact, to recognize this isn't just, as you say, some discomfort. This is actually pain. This is actually affecting quality of life. And I think those are really important things to recognize.
Definitely. Just one final thing on that I remembered is around clotting. If you are experiencing clotting, I believe it's bigger than a 20p piece. You need
Yeah.
to go and speak to a doctor as well. So a lot of people, and this is something that loads of people have gone through, where they think that big clots are normal, and actually that's probably what's giving you a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort and a lot of lethargy. So please do also talk to people if you're experiencing clotting.
Yeah.
We've had so many comments. Everybody is saying the same. Yes, this is something we need to break the stigma around. And I hope everybody on this session is going to go away and say, went to a session today, we talked about periods, and get the conversation, because we need to be the change we want to see, don't we, around this, just as we did 10 years ago when we were starting the supporting organisations. But I'm just going to ask you to, as we leave this, Sally, to say, menopause friendly, menstruation friendly. We've already seen organisations who are doing remarkable things. And I can see in the chat a lot of people are saying that their organisations are providing period products. It takes more than that to change culture. And we've seen some remarkable organisations that are doing great things. Could you give us any examples of what good looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can go to the Menstruation Friendly website. There's some case studies, Ninja Theory, Huddersfield Town. We've had AXA UK, Lloyds Banking Group have done some amazing work, and they're really, sharing their stories of what's worked well. I think it starts with listening. I think it's the same with everything. If we listen to what's the lived experience like in your organisations, period products may be something that's really valuable and really needed. We've seen some amazing work being done in organisations like Mars, who've gone through a process of actually changing their production line uniform from being white to dark blue. The feedback of the difference it's made to how confident people feel to be able to manage their menstruation or their menstrual cycle, or even things like flooding and bleeding into perimenopause, has been really, really huge in terms of being able to manage with dignity. And I think that's a massive piece that we're really wanting to encourage. So listening to lived experience, I think, has been really powerful. And then exploring, what's it like to work in our workplace if someone is having challenges around their menstrual cycle or menstrual health, and what are the things that are getting in the way of someone being their best, and what can we do to amend and adjust those. And a lot of that comes from training education in general, training managers, and encouraging those good supportive conversations where we're not scared, as Talycia was saying, not scared of saying the word period. It's a normal biological process that happens to over half the population every single month. It's a really important topic that we cover. I know someone's just said around PMDD. We did a session on PMDD recently. You can go to the Henpicked website. We've got all of the sessions we've run around menstruation and menstrual health. I really encourage you to have a look on there. The PMDD Project is a really great charity that we support that has some really great information and resources. So lots and lots of information on the Henpicked site to be able to support. And say Menstruation Friendly is very much there to support you as an organisation if that's why you're joining today's session in terms of what does best practice look like and how can we open these conversations. But just want to say, Talycia, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate sharing your knowledge and your experience. And I think this is really exciting to be able to see more and more conversations like this happening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to everybody who joined us and for all of your comments and hints and tips in the chat as well. Let's keep this conversation going. Have a great day.